It's the family reunion we've been preparing for months. Everyone's here from the oldest to the youngest. The air is full of chatter, laughter, and the aroma of Grandma's famous barbecue. But then my father, Greg, the man who's always been the pillar of our family, stands up. In front of everyone, his children, his grandkids, his siblings, he points his finger at me. I'm proud of all my children except the loser, he says, eyes cold. Time freezes. The room goes silent. My heart races, but I don't cry. I get up slowly and walk out. But as I leave, the whispers begin. And so does the story. I'd always believed that the family reunion was our yearly tradition of love, laughter, and bonding. My siblings and I spent weeks planning the event, making sure everyone felt involved, and ensuring that our father Greg, the rock of our family, felt special. After all, he was the one who had raised us. And I was always the quiet one. The one who stayed out of the limelight, kept things together, took care of the details. My name is Claire. I'm the second of 4 children, and for the longest time I believed I was simply an ordinary part of the family. I wasn't the golden child like my older brother Ryan, or the baby Ella who always seemed to get away with everything. I was just Claire. But in my father's eyes, I'd always felt like the one who didn't quite live up to expectations. Growing up, I was always aware of my father's high standards. He built his empire from the ground up, starting with nothing but a dream and an iron will. His life had been a testament to hard work, dedication, and an unwavering belief that family was everything. But with that belief came the pressure to perform, to succeed, to be someone. It wasn't easy being the daughter of Greg Caldwell. My older brother was a natural leader. Ryan was ambitious, successful, and charismatic, everything my father had wanted. My sister Ella was sweet and adored by everyone, her sunny disposition winning her the affection of all our relatives. And then there was me, the middle child, the one who never quite seemed to find her place. For years, I sacrificed my own desires for the family. I put my career aspirations on hold to help Dad with his business ventures, starting from the small projects he needed me to handle to the bigger ones that required my meticulous attention. I knew he needed me, and I wanted to prove myself worthy of his praise, but somehow, no matter how hard I worked, it never felt like enough. I had always felt like an afterthought. Whenever Dad spoke of his achievements, he would always speak of Ryan's success in finance or Ella's ability to bring people together. But when it came to me, it was as though I was invisible. No one ever spoke of the sacrifices I'd made. No one ever acknowledged the hard work I put in, always in the shadows of my siblings. The years went by and my role in the family remained the same. Supportive, invisible, and every time I tried to break free and pursue my own dreams, someone pulled me back. There was always a reason why I couldn't follow my own path. The business needed me. Dad needed me. The family needed me. But at this family reunion, something had shifted. I had shifted. Maybe it was the years of suppressing my own desires. Maybe it was the constant feeling of being overlooked. Or maybe it was the quiet realization that despite all my efforts, I would never be enough for my father. As I watched the smiles and laughter around me, I thought about everything I'd sacrificed for this family. And yet, as I looked across the room at my father, the man I had given everything to, I realized that I had nothing left for myself. I had given up my career, my passions, my very identity, all in the name of family. All in the name of trying to prove that I wasn't the loser he'd always implied I was. And then it happened. Dad stood up, raising his glass to give the traditional toast to my daughter Amelia. The moment was supposed to be about her, a celebration of her graduation and her achievements. But my father's words shattered that moment completely. I'm proud of all my children except the loser. The words rang out a sharp slap to my chest, the pain radiating through me like nothing I had ever felt before. My siblings looked on in stunned silence. Amelia, my sweet, brilliant daughter, sat frozen as if unable to comprehend what was happening. The entire room fell silent, all eyes on me. It wasn't the first time I had felt like the odd one out, but hearing those words from my father, his cruel judgment, his disdain, it broke something deep inside me. I had always tried to be the dutiful daughter, the one who never complained, the one who always stepped in to help. But now all that effort had been for nothing. I felt the weight of my father's gaze on me. His eyes cold, calculating, pierced through me. For the first time I realized he wasn't looking at me as his daughter. He was looking at me as a failure. A wave of heat surged through my body, my blood boiling. I could feel my chest tighten with every heartbeat. I could feel the tears welling up in my eyes, but I wouldn't let them fall. Not now. Not in front of them. I had always been strong. I was done being the one who stayed silent, the one who quietly accepted whatever he handed me. As I stood up from the table, my heart racing, I locked eyes with my father for one last moment. And in that instant, I made a decision. I wasn't going to stay. Not in this family. Not in this life where I had been nothing more than a shadow. I turned walking toward the door, leaving behind the family I had sacrificed everything for. Leaving behind the man who had never seen me as more than a loser. I walked out of that room, my pulse pounding in my ears, the sound of my footsteps echoing louder than any words I'd ever heard. It felt like I was in a dream, no, a nightmare that I couldn't wake up from. The cool night air hit me as I stepped outside, the wind brushing against my skin, but it did nothing to ease the anger boiling inside me. I stood there for a moment, my hands shaking, trying to process what had just happened. My father, the man I had respected and adored my whole life, had publicly humiliated me in front of my family. And for what? For not being enough. For being the one who had always been there but never noticed. But as the shock wore off, another feeling began to creep in. It wasn't just anger that had taken over, it was betrayal. I had always known that I wasn't Dad's favorite, that I was never the one he was proud of. But hearing those words, that sharp, unforgiving accusation of being a loser, it hit harder than I ever expected. It was as if all the years I had devoted to him, all the sacrifices I had made, meant nothing. And in that moment, I realized something that I hadn't been able to see before. This wasn't just about being overlooked in favor of my siblings. This was deeper. My father didn't just think I was a failure, he had always treated me like one. His cold, dismissive attitude toward me was a product of something far darker than just family dynamics. It was a reflection of how he truly saw me. But the truth was something I had to face now. I had been living in a bubble for years, thinking that if I just worked harder, proved myself more, showed my worth, he would eventually see me as more than the loser he always called me. I was wrong. The truth was that he never would. I had given so much of myself to this family, my time, my energy, my ambitions. I'd put my career on hold so many times, sacrificed my own dreams so he could live out his. I had supported his every venture, every decision, always being the one who held it all together when things fell apart. And yet I had always been the afterthought, the one who would never measure up. I walked to my car, the weight of the evening heavy on my shoulders. I didn't look back. I couldn't. The thought of returning to that table, to that room full of people who had just witnessed my humiliation, made my stomach turn. As I sat in my car, the engine humming to life, I felt a strange sense of liberation. It was like the chains that had bound me to my father's expectations, to the need for his approval, had been shattered. The road ahead of me seemed uncertain, but for the first time in my life, I felt like I could breathe. I was free from his judgment, free from the constant need to prove myself. But then a thought crossed my mind, one that sent a chill down my spine. What if there was more to this than just the shame he had inflicted on me in that moment? What if in his cruel words there was a deeper secret buried, something I hadn't seen before? What if he wasn't just disappointed in me? What if there was something he had been hiding all these years, something that could change everything? The betrayal wasn't just personal. It felt like a lie had been spun around my life, one I'd unknowingly walked into. For the first time, I wasn't just angry at my father. I was suspicious. What had he been hiding all these years? Was there something I didn't know? I knew I couldn't just let this go. The silence I'd always accepted, the distance I'd always lived with, wasn't enough anymore. I had to find the truth. No matter how painful or shocking it might be, I needed to uncover the secrets buried in this family. But I wasn't going to do it impulsively. I had spent my life running from the truth, trying to please my father, trying to fit into the role he had carved out for me. No more. This time I would take control. I wasn't going to be the loser anymore. I was going to make sure that whatever lay beneath this betrayal would be exposed. and when it was, I would make sure I would be the one standing tall. The night felt endless as I drove aimlessly through the streets, my mind spinning with a million questions. But there was one thing that kept pushing its way to the forefront: revenge. Not in the reckless emotional sense that I had initially felt when I stormed out of that reunion, but something far more calculated. Something that would make sure I wasn't just the victim in this story. I was going to take control, and I was going to make sure that my father saw me as I truly was, not his failure, but his reckoning. For years I had allowed him to dictate the terms of my life. His silent disapproval, his constant comparing of me to my siblings, it had shaped who I was, but it wasn't who I was anymore. The Claire I was before that night was dead. Now I was someone stronger. Someone who understood the true power of knowledge and the dangerous potential of the truth. I knew that my father, Greg Caldwell, was a man who thrived on control. His empire, his business, his influence, his family was built on manipulation and power. Everything he did, everything he built was because of the image he projected, the perfect, untouchable image he crafted over the years. But now I was starting to see cracks in that image. I started by going through the business records. Years of working for him, of being his right-hand woman, had given me a deep understanding of the inner workings of his empire. I had access to everything: his financials, his contracts, his investments, his secrets. For the first time, I felt a sense of power surge within me. It wasn't just about being the dutiful daughter anymore. It wasn't about proving him wrong in some petty way. It was about reclaiming my own worth, my own future. It was about exposing him for who he truly was. I knew the first step would be the hardest. I had to dig deep. There was something off about the way he had always handled the family finances, something that had never sat right with me. I had been too loyal, too blindly trusting to question it before. But now I saw everything through a different lens. I spent the next few days carefully combing through the documents I had access to. It wasn't just his business dealings that caught my attention, it was the personal ones. The way he had moved money around, made questionable investments. And then there were the things I hadn't noticed before: unexplained transactions, missing documents, transactions made to unknown parties. And it wasn't just the business. There were personal relationships involved. Those were even more telling. I found evidence of a second life he had been living, a hidden affair, something that had been buried beneath the surface for years. A woman. A secret. It all clicked. The pieces were starting to fit together in a way I hadn't expected. It wasn't just about the business or his image anymore. It was about something far more personal. My father had betrayed me in ways I couldn't have imagined. He had been living a lie, one that involved not just my trust, but my mother's as well. And it was time for the truth to come out. I was no longer the quiet daughter, the one who had accepted his silence and his cruelty. I was going to expose everything: the affair, the shady financial dealings, and the manipulation that had been so deeply embedded in every aspect of our family's life. But I wasn't going to do it in some dramatic, impulsive way. No, this was going to be methodical, surgical. The first step was to gather evidence. I needed concrete proof of everything I had found, proof that could not be ignored. I began to quietly track down the people involved in these transactions, the ones who had helped my father hide the truth. Some of them were old colleagues. Others were business partners who had long since disappeared from the scene. It didn't matter. I had the resources now, and I wasn't going to stop until I had everything I needed. I took late-night trips to the office, pulling records, making copies of files, gathering all the evidence I would need to expose the truth. I knew that this wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about justice. Justice for myself, for my family, for all the years I had been made to feel invisible, irrelevant. I didn't tell anyone what I was doing, not even Amelia. She didn't need to know. This wasn't her fight yet. She had her life to live, and I wasn't going to drag her into this, not unless I absolutely had to. As the weeks went on, I began to piece everything together. I had compiled a solid case: documents, emails, financial statements, and personal correspondences that would tear my father's world apart. The affair, the lies, the financial fraud, all of it was there in black and white. But I didn't stop there. I wanted to make sure he paid for what he had done not just to me, but to everyone he had hurt along the way. It wasn't enough for me to just expose him. I wanted to make sure that he understood the true cost of betraying me. I contacted a lawyer, someone discreet, someone who had experience with high-profile cases like this. I didn't trust anyone in my father's circle anymore. But this lawyer, she would be my ally in this battle. I needed someone who understood how to bring down a man like my father, someone who could help me use the law to my advantage. Every night I worked on my plan. Slowly, carefully, I built my case. The more I uncovered, the more my resentment grew. But it wasn't just resentment. It was a fierce determination. I was done being the victim. I was done letting him control my life. And when the time came when everything was in place, I would make sure that everyone knew who the real loser was. The day I finally sat down with the lawyer, I felt an unfamiliar calmness wash over me. There was no more hesitation, no more second-guessing myself. I wasn't the daughter who had spent her life seeking approval from her father anymore. I wasn't even the woman who had spent endless years bending over backward to please everyone but herself. I was Claire Caldwell, and I was reclaiming my life. The lawyer Jenna had been exactly what I needed: sharp, efficient, and discreet. After we went over the evidence, she took control in a way I hadn't expected. She didn't question my motives or try to talk me out of it. She simply got to work drafting letters, making calls, setting up meetings. I watched her with a sense of awe, realizing that in that room for the first time in my life I was not alone. There was no more silence, no more compliance. I was in control now, and I was going to make sure my father understood that. Jenna's first move was a quiet one. She reached out to some of my father's closest business associates under the guise of a routine audit. The goal was simple: create enough of a stir behind the scenes that my father would begin to feel the pressure without knowing the full extent of my plan. At first it was subtle. My father's business empire, once so carefully crafted, began to show signs of strain. Transactions were delayed, questions were raised, and with every little ripple I could feel the tension building. The man who had once controlled everything was starting to lose his grip. It was exhilarating watching the foundation he had built for so long slowly crumble. But what was more satisfying was the realization that I wasn't just sitting idly by accepting his cruelty anymore. I was actively dismantling everything he had tried to make me believe. I was stripping away the layers of falsehood and betrayal, and in the process I was finally giving myself the one thing I had always wanted: freedom. Over the following weeks, I began to reimagine my life. Without the weight of my father's expectations, without the stifling need for his approval, I felt a lightness I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about rediscovering who I was outside of the roles I had been forced to play for so long. I enrolled in an art class. It had always been a passion of mine, one I had buried under the demands of my family life and my father's needs. But now I was finally taking the time to do something for myself. I spent hours at the easel, lost in the colors and strokes of the canvas. Each brushstroke felt like a small act of rebellion, a declaration that I was no longer just Claire, the quiet, dutiful daughter. I was someone else, someone who had a voice, who had a right to her own dreams. I also started reconnecting with old friends, the ones I had lost touch with over the years. Women who had been part of my life before the suffocating grip of family responsibility had taken over. We'd shared laughs, dreams, and conversations about life, conversations that had once been so easy but had slipped away as I focused on keeping everyone else happy. The first time I met with an old friend, Ava, over coffee, I was struck by how easily we slipped back into our old rhythm. It felt like I hadn't lost all those years at all. "I'm so proud of you, Claire," she said, her eyes warm and sincere. "You've always had it in you. You just needed to believe it." Her words stuck with me long after we parted ways. Ava was right. I had always known deep down that I was capable of more. But I had let my father's voice drown out my own. I had let his expectations shape my entire existence. It was no wonder I had felt lost for so long. But now the fog was lifting. I could see the world through a different lens, a lens of possibility, of self-worth, of power. I was no longer trapped in the shadows of my father's decisions. I was making my own. One of the hardest things to do in this journey was to face Amelia, my daughter. She had always been my greatest source of pride, my motivation for everything I did. But I had always tried to protect her from the ugly side of our family. I didn't want her to see the fractures that had always existed between her grandfather and me. I didn't want her to witness the humiliation that had always simmered beneath the surface of our family gatherings. But now I knew it was time to tell her the truth, the whole truth. She needed to understand why I had been absent, why I had pushed so hard for her to succeed. She needed to know that it wasn't her fault that I wasn't trying to live vicariously through her. "Mom, what's going on?" Amelia had asked, her voice soft with concern after a few weeks of my newfound independence. "You've been acting so different lately. Happier, I guess, but also distant." I had been preparing for this moment, but no amount of preparation could make it easier. Still, I took a deep breath and met her gaze. "Amelia, I've spent my whole life trying to be something. I wasn't trying to please your grandfather, trying to prove to him that I was worth something." I said, my voice steady but filled with emotion. "But I've realized something. I'm not here to prove anything to anyone anymore. I'm here for you, and for myself. And I'm sorry if I've ever made you feel like you had to carry the weight of all that." Her expression softened, and I could see the wheels turning in her mind. "Mom," she said, her voice gentle, "you've always been enough. You're amazing just the way you are." I smiled, the weight in my chest finally lifting. The moment I had feared turned out to be the moment that freed me. Amelia understood. She always had. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just fighting to prove myself to others. I was fighting for my own happiness, for my own peace. And I knew deep down that the journey ahead was going to be one of rediscovery, of reestablishing my own identity free from the ghosts of my past. But there was still one thing left to do, my father. He would pay for his betrayal, for his lies. And when the time came, I would make sure that he understood the true cost of turning his back on his daughter. I had been ready for everything. The anger, the betrayal, the quiet satisfaction of seeing my father's empire crumble. I had carefully plotted every step, gathered the evidence, and prepared myself for the final confrontation. But nothing had prepared me for what happened next. The truth wasn't just what I had uncovered about my father's deceitful business practices or his affair. No, the truth was far more shocking, more intimate. It was the revelation that I had been living in a lie that had been spun not just by my father, but by someone I had never suspected, my mother. It all started with a phone call from Jenna, my lawyer, early one morning. She sounded different, serious almost, concerned. "Claire, we need to meet," she said, her voice tight. "There's something I've uncovered, something you need to see." I felt a knot form in my stomach as I agreed to meet her at her office. Jenna had been my ally in this journey, and I had trusted her completely. But I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever she was about to reveal was going to change everything. When I arrived, she didn't waste time with pleasantries. She pulled out a folder, and as I opened it, my heart dropped into my stomach. The documents inside were not what I expected. They weren't about my father's financial manipulations or his affair. They were about my mother. "I know you've been focused on Greg's betrayal," Jenna began, her voice softer now. "But there's something you missed. Something that ties into everything else you've discovered." My mind raced as I flipped through the documents. They were emails, photos, and letters, things I had never seen before. My mother had been involved in a secretive financial arrangement with my father, but it wasn't just about money. It was about something far more personal. My mother, the woman who had always been my support, had been in on the deceit. She had been hiding things from me, things I hadn't even realized. "I don't understand," I whispered, my mind struggling to process the information. "Why would she do this? Why would she lie to me too?" Jenna sighed, leaning back in her chair. "I'm sorry, Claire, but it looks like your mother was the one who kept the secret about Greg's affair all these years. And she was complicit in the way he manipulated everything, including you. The truth is, your father never believed in you because your mother helped him shape that belief." The betrayal hit me like a punch to the gut. My father, yes, had been cruel and unforgiving, But to find out that my mother, the woman who had always been my champion, had been part of this, it shattered everything I thought I knew about my family. Jenna continued, I found these documents, bank statements, communication records that show your mother had been helping Greg cover up his financial mess. She knew about the affair, knew about the manipulation, and yet she allowed it to continue. She even turned a blind eye to your father's treatment of you. Why we're still trying to piece it together. I sat there numb, staring at the papers in front of me. It wasn't just my father's betrayal that cut the deepest, it was the realization that my mother, the woman who had raised me, had never truly had my back. She had been complicit in the years of emotional neglect, in the manipulation that had kept me trapped in a life I didn't even recognize anymore. For days I didn't know what to do. I felt as though the world I had spent my entire life building had crumbled into dust beneath me. How could I confront my mother? How could I face her after everything I had uncovered? My father had been cruel, yes, but my mother. She was supposed to be my ally, my protector. And now I saw her for who she truly was, another player in the game of deceit and control. It took me a while to gather the courage, but when I did, I called her. She was quiet when she answered, and I could tell that something had shifted in her too. Mom, we need to talk, I said, my voice firm but shaking with emotion. I know, she replied softly. I knew this day was coming. I took a deep breath. I don't understand. How could you do this? How could you stand by while Dad treated me the way he did? While he humiliated me? While he manipulated everything around him? You knew all of it, didn't you? There was a long silence on the other end of the line before she spoke again. It wasn't that simple, Claire. Your father was always difficult, but I was just trying to keep the peace. I thought if I stayed quiet, everything would work out. I never wanted you to get hurt. Her voice cracked with the weight of her guilt. I didn't know how to stop him. I didn't know how to protect you from him. I didn't want to lose everything we had. My mind swirled with confusion, anger, and disbelief. She had known, and yet she had let me live in this suffocating silence for all these years. She had let me believe that I was the problem, that I was the failure, while she and my father had silently destroyed everything around me. But I also saw the truth in her words. My mother had been trapped too caught in a web of manipulation and fear. She had been complicit, yes, but perhaps she had been a victim as well. I don't know if I can ever forgive you, I said softly, the words feeling like acid on my tongue. But I need to be free. I need to know that I can finally stand on my own. There was no reply, just the sound of her soft breathing. I hung up the phone feeling a strange sense of closure. It wasn't the resolution I had imagined. There was no dramatic confrontation, no clear answers. But it was enough. For the first time in my life, I understood the full scope of the betrayal I had been living under. And with that understanding came a new sense of freedom. I wasn't just confronting my father anymore. I was confronting the entire life I had been forced to live. I wasn't going to let either of them define me. I was going to take control of my future, of my happiness, in a way I had never done before. The truth had set me free, not in the way I had hoped, not with grand gestures or finality, but it had set me free nonetheless, and now I was ready for whatever came next.